welcome to Rise of the Rulelords Unchained. This is a special Patreon-only podcast where I'm going to be talking about, I don't know, could be just about anything. Maybe I am feeling like talking about myself. Maybe I want to do a little review, or maybe we'll do a couple interviews. And I am so excited to have one for you guys today. When Pathfinder 2nd Edition first started, not a lot of people were grasping on to the game, but there were a couple of people, and one of them was just amazing. Put all of this cool effort into making these really awesome instructional videos with really pretty graphics, and has been someone who's really helped me with the game. So I'm so excited that I have him on with me today. That person, of course, is Dave with How It's Played. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm happy to be here as an exclusive for the Patreon. You don't want this content to get out to the public masses. We got to keep this safe and secure and exclusive. So
we don't need the proletariat listening to this.
Who knows what's going to be said over this conversation? We just know this is going to be too hot and spicy for the public.
Exactly, but I'm very happy to say that though this is only being released exclusively on Patreon, I have met my first goal on Patreon of getting $25 worth of subscribers.
Hey.
So this episode will be released completely for free. That will still only be listenable on Patreon. So I'm very excited that more people are going to be able to hear our conversation. So, Dave, you have made a huge mistake coming onto this podcast. I'm sure it'll do nothing but make your numbers worse. But we're very happy to have you. So the first question that I usually have for my players, just to do a little icebreaker and get the conversation started, is what are you drinking today?
Well, I am drinking what I usually drink, which is, and because this is exclusive, I'm going to give you the exclusive dirt. This is generic diet Mountain Lion beverage.
Wow.
It's essentially the knockoff diet Mountain Dew that you get from Food Lion.
Right.
But it's costs half as much, and I swear it tastes better than real Mountain Dew. So there you go.
I've never heard of Mountain Lion. Like, that's a soda company?
No, I mean it's I'm sure where you are they got Food Lion grocery stores, right?
No,
or no?
I've never heard of that. That might be like how Texas has HEB or something.
Yeah, maybe it's just an East Coast thing because I've lived my whole life on the East Coast of the U.S.
Ah, okay.
But Food Lion is a major grocery store chain out here, and they have their generic brands of pretty much everything. And their generic version of Mountain Dew is called Mountain Lion. So yeah, it's a combination of me just being completely cheap, because it's half as much as regular Mountain Dew, and in my opinion, tastes better than Mountain Dew. So
whatever works for you. So you've said that you've lived your whole life on the East Coast. What have you been doing in the East Coast, and how would you transcribe that into a Pathfinder 2nd Edition background?
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, so what have I been doing on the East Coast? Don't know how much detail you want to go into the epic life story, but in recent years, I've lived in Virginia in a very rural, small town part of Virginia, down in the Shenandoah Valley. And as far as a background, I would say like an educator or a teacher background.
Teacher background is one of them.
Very cool. Very cool. And yeah, I guess ever since 2001. 2001 is when I kind of fell into a career as a corporate trainer for a very large insurance company. And for 17 years, I worked there doing training for the various departments within the company. And unfortunately, this company a couple years ago went through some restructuring and my local office was closed. So while I was looking for the next job in the training sphere, the adult education sphere, I decided a good way to polish my instructional design skills with online training would be to purchase the tools you use for that and start making YouTube videos with them. So
nice. Did you start with Pathfinder 2nd Edition, or were you working on other things or thinking about doing other things before that?
Yeah, so my first video was actually for Starfinder, and when I started, I alternated between Starfinder and 5th Ed D&D, and I started with Pathfinder 2nd Edition like the week it released. So I hit the ground running with that. But yeah, I guess the origins of my YouTube channel had a lot to do with both me wanting to kind of take my background as an educator, as a teacher, and my passion for tabletop role-playing games and putting them together. And also, at the same time, I had to teach myself how to use a new software platform called Articulate, which is what instructional designers use to create online training. When you watch those videos, people assume that I'm using PowerPoint or something like that, and I'm actually using either Articulate or Adobe Captivate, which are not intended for YouTube videos, but it's what I know, what I use in my job. So yeah, so anyway.
I mean, if it works.
Yeah, it works. And the good news is I actually was able to take everything I learned teaching myself how to make those videos and got my next job, and I do that sort of thing full time now, working for a new company. So
Awesome. I overheard over the Nerd Podcast radio interview that you did, which all of you guys should go check out, that you've been playing RPGs for 35 years, which to date myself means that you've been playing games longer than I've been alive. So how did that influence like your want to be an educator, or vice versa, where you liked being an educator and so you really got into the gaming part? How'd that work?
yeah, so I guess how I got started with RPGs, when I was 9 years old, my family moved to a small town in Ohio. And this was 1984. Like, the neighborhood we moved into, I met the kids who are already living in that neighborhood, and they're like, we play this game called Dungeons and Dragons. Why don't you come over sometime and play it? And me and my brother started playing Dungeons and Dragons, first edition, the red box. But yeah, because that's what our new neighborhood friends all played, and I was just instantly hooked on it. It was the most amazing game ever, and it's pretty much been at the front of my mind ever since then. So yeah, I like to joke that I'm a real life Stranger Things kid, because it was the it was the 80s and I was a kid, and we started playing first edition in our friend's basement in suburbia. So there's not really much of a connection between my interest in being an adult educator and my interest in tabletop role-playing games. One didn't inform the other. I really didn't set out to be an educator. It's a role that I just sort of fell into. When I joined that insurance company back in 2001, I was hired for one job, and literally 2 weeks after I was hired, they completely changed the job description of that position and converted it into a training position. But lucky me, I took to it and I enjoyed it, and it launched my whole career. So yeah, no connection, but I enjoyed them both.
That's a nice happy accident, as Bob Ross would say. I think it has helped you a lot with making very clear, very precise videos about the Pathfinder 2e rule set. So what made you want to go with 2e in the first place? Why not D&D? Because didn't you hear that Paizo is failing?
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, I did hear that this week. Whenever I wake up and I log on to any social media and I have people I don't know asking me, will you please make a response video to X? I just know some YouTuber I've never heard of has said something mean about Paizo, and now for some reason it's my business. Yeah, so I started with Starfinder and 5th edition D&D, and when I started the channel, I alternated. I did one video a week, and I alternated between those two topics. So I have made a dozen or so 5e videos, and I enjoy 5e.
Exactly. There's no reason to choose one edition over the other. It's just about what you have fun
Yeah,
with.
I have my preferences, and my preference is for Pathfinder 2nd edition. But last week I played in a 5e game, and if my buddy calls me up and like, hey, I'm going to be GMing a 5e game, do you want in? I'm not like, oh, I don't do that 5th edition stuff. I'm like, no,
right.
Are fun people going to be there? Yes, I will be there, and I will have fun, because the people are what make the role-playing game, not the system.
Exactly.
But, to get to your question of why am I doing so many Pathfinder videos, I make the videos I make for one of two reasons. One is because the members of my Patreon vote for the topic, and they vote on one new topic every month that I do a fairly deep dive video for between all of my smaller rule reminder videos. And the second reason why I make a video is because I'm playing that game. When I was playing Starfinder, I was making a bunch of Starfinder videos. When my local friends said, hey, we just finished our adventure of Starfinder, let's try Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Well, now I'm going to be playing videos for that because that's where my interest and my focus is. I keep the door open. Over the 4th of July weekend, I'm going to be GMing the Alien RPG for the first time.
Oh, that sounds super cool. What's that one like?
It's not as tactical as Pathfinder. It leads a little more towards narrative. It's a horror RPG. So it's very much based on a stress mechanic, and the more stress a character is under, then both the more effective they become because they are more focused on what their task is, because their instinct for survival has been increased, but it also, every step of stress that makes them more focused like that also makes them more likely to panic. And if they panic, then all kinds of bad things happen. Just from reading the book, it looks like it's going to mirror the vibe of the movies fairly well. And the adventure I'm running is actually their Colonial Marines box set, so it's very much like the second movie with Marines and machine guns and hordes of aliens and whatnot.
What got you into Pathfinder in the first place? Like, it does sound like you are able to find, games that aren't just mainstream, but what about the system made you want to pick it up and play it?
There was a time between the end of 4th edition and the start of 5th edition, and I was a 4E DM. In fact, most of my current players go all the way back about 10 years or so, and we were all 4E players. During that time, I had one buddy of mine who was like, you gotta check out this Pathfinder thing. It looks great. It looks way better than 4E. Hindsight's 2020. I wish I had listened to him and looked at it earlier. But for various reasons, me and my group, we stuck with 4th edition, playing a campaign and that rule set. But after 4E had ended and 5e hadn't come on yet, where we were in that limbo area, I decided, well, I'm going to check out this Pathfinder thing. As soon as I started reading not so much the rules, but I started reading the adventures, and I started reading Wrath of the Righteous, and I started reading Iron Gods, and Ruins of Aslant. I went from just casually flipping through an adventure to I must subscribe to Paizo and get every one of their adventures from here to eternity. I was just so completely drawn into the world and the adventures that they were writing that I kicked myself for not jumping onto Pathfinder 1E sooner. And so I guess from there, it was just a natural extension that when 2E came out, I was already kind of rocking and rolling and loving the whole Galarian, or however you choose to pronounce it.
I have a lot of trouble with it. Galarian. I'm just going to call it G World in my
I discovered G World, and it looked really cool, so I stayed there.
So sounds like you played a lot of them. Is that part of what is decorating your awesome accompanying of shelves behind you? I've always been curious about that.
Yeah, to answer your question, yes. There are some RPGs behind me. Yeah. But the scary thing is on these videos where I'm on camera, you don't see the 2 bookshelves on this side that are also completely full of RPG books as well. And then I have a work office in the other room, and it has a bookshelf full of RPG books as well. I literally do not have a way to make an accurate count of all the RPG books that I've purchased and will never, ever, ever get an opportunity to play. But I just love reading RPG books in the same way that normal people will read novels. Right. For the shelves behind me and the stuff behind me, usually the question I get most is, what's that big red robot behind me?
Yeah, I have been curious about that. It is very cool.
One of my other hobbies outside of role-playing games is Gunpla, which is just making plastic Gundam models based on the Gundam anime. A couple years ago, like 5 or 6 of my friends all pitched in their money to import from Japan this giant red Gundam model. And you can't really see it on the camera, but the model is so big that there's actually another Gundam that's wearing that big thing as armor. So it's like, it's so big, you've got to be in a Gundam in order to sit in the cockpit to fly that thing. But that's called a Neo Zeong. If you ever watch Gundam Unicorn, the big bad pilots that thing, and in the climax of the Gundam Unicorn series. And I guess in addition to that, I have my Dragon minis are on the mini fridge that the big Gundam robot sits on. And on my bookshelf, there is my collection of replica lightsabers. And I'll be going to Disney World in a couple months where I can spend another embarrassing amount of money to purchase new additions to my collection.
I've heard about that. That sounds so fun. Like, I was watching an XP to level 3 about it. Like, you get to pick a couple different hilts, a couple different crystals, and you come out of it. I heard that there's actually like heft to it. It's not like these plastic ones that you get from Walmart.
Yeah, if you go through the Disneyland or Disney World build your own lightsaber thing, it's a whole show. It's an experience. They're in character, and you go into a workshop and they tell you how you're achieving your force sensitivity, and you build your own lightsaber. And yes, the first thing that everybody will tell you is shocking how heavy and how hefty and sturdy the hilts of those build your own lightsabers are. So yeah, I've one of those lightsabers on the shelf is a replica of the lightsaber that my character in Star Wars The Old Republic MMO carries. So it's like his family saber, and I'm going to build a Sith saber when I go back in a couple of months. So.
On Twitter, you mentioned that you actually wrote something for a Star Wars RPG.
Yeah, okay, so first of all, it was a fan supplement. I want to make sure everybody noticed that I wrote a fairly popular fan supplement. Back in the 90s, I wrote something called the Jedi Handbook and published it onto the internet, and it was full of all kinds of alternative rules for Force users, where created rules for using blasters where you could use the Force to alter the path of your blaster, and like kung fu monks who would imbue their fists with the Force, and just all kinds of other Force stuff. And I put it onto the internet through a listserv way back in the days of listservs, and within probably a year, there were probably 6 or 7 different fan pages that people had put up in support of my little supplement. It got translated. A bunch of fans translated it into their local languages, which is weird because like nobody ever asked. It's just like I would occasionally go online and I would just see, somebody did this. Somebody made a whole MUD. Before the days of MMOs, there were text-based MUDs.
What's MUD stand for?
Multi-user dungeon. Yeah, before EverQuest and Ultima Online and all the graphical MMOs, there were MMOs that were just text-based. But somebody made one of those where it was all about my fan supplement, the Jedi Handbook. I am pretty sure there was a nod and wink to it in one of the official Saga Edition RPG books. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that was just kind of weird that in the infancy of the internet, this thing kind of blew up.
I mean, it sounds like really cool content, and we are desperate for content, especially with 2E. It sounds like you've played a lot of different games. So what is a game besides Pathfinder or D&D that you think a lot of people might have a lot of fun branching off into?
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I owed 1,000,001 RPGs. This should be an easy question to answer. But I think like the one game that nobody is familiar with and nobody hears about, and when I introduce players to it, they universally walk away saying they loved it, is a game called Dusk City Outlaws.
Ooh.
Dusk City Outlaws, it's an RPG in a box. They don't have 1,000,000 supplements and this and that. You buy the box, and the box has a GM guide, a player's guide, an adventure, and you can go into like drive-through RPG to download PDFs for a bunch of other adventures to keep playing. They're all official. It was designed by Rodney Thompson. If you're not familiar with Rodney Thompson, he was the lead designer of Star Wars Saga Edition for Wizards, which for those who are not familiar, is basically like D&D 3.5 in the Star Wars universe. It's the third
Ooh.
version of Wizards D20 RPG, so there were like two failed versions, and then he came in and made Saga Edition, which is outstanding. He was brought in to fix 4th edition, which he largely did. At the end of the run of 4th edition, there was a line called 4th edition Essentials, where there was a new Essentials Player's Handbook and as Essentials Monster Manual and whatnot, and he was in charge of all those. And if you're a board gamer, there's a board game called Lords of Waterdeep.
Heard of
That's
that
what
one.
it is. Lords of Waterdeep.
Oh, okay.
Really, really good board game. Well, guess what? He created that board game. So anyway, he left Wizards and started his own company, and their first product was Dusk City Outlaws, which is sort of a steampunk world that's very much like the setting of Dishonored, if you've ever played the Dishonored video game.
I haven't, but I'm sure that enough people have to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's just this mix of like gritty underworld in like Victorian England, but with steampunkish elements, and it's a really cool setting, and it's a rules light, heavy narrative game, and I just think it's really amazingly well designed to be something lightweight and easy to put on the game table and play. So that's my recommendation, Dusk City Outlaws. If you're a fan of comic books, they've also put out a sister game using the same rule set called The Spectaculars, and it's just a superhero comic book version of the same thing. But yeah, Dusk City Outlaws, The Spectaculars, check it out.
For these games, have you typically been the GM for these games? And if so, like, what have been your biggest takeaways from being the game master, or keeper, or whatever name that they go by? Like, what's something that seems to be universally the same between all of these, or things that people could take away from one game and apply to another?
Well, I think things that are universal is acknowledging that this is a social game, and so you have to be inviting of thoughts and opinions and be open to what people say and do, fellow players and the GM and whatnot. As a GM, I always say you need to set your expectations, because in my experience, 90% of problems that arise with RPGs, of having a problem player or something going sideways or somebody being upset at the game table or whatnot, is usually because as a GM, you didn't set the expectation that, like, this is, the games I run are high fantasy and heroic. So for the games I run, we don't want evil alignments, and I don't want a player. I don't allow players who attack fellow players. I don't like PvP in my games. Well, I mean, if you set that expectation up front, then either that doesn't happen in the game, or if it does happen, then you can always fall back and say, hey, look, I said when we set up the expectation that it was going to be, no evil characters, no killing your fellow players, and just kind of head off those problems at the pass. Another big mistake that I think GMs make is saying no. I think far too often a player has an idea and a GM just says, no, come on, whatever. And it's more fun for players to hear yes than it is for them to hear no.
Right.
So, change it to yes, but this other complication is going to happen as a result. Or yes, but I don't see it as you doing 12 backflips through the air. I see it as you darting from this square to that square. Or yes, but you're going to have to roll really, really high for it to happen. You don't want to crush a player's creativity by telling them no. Try to encourage creativity by saying yes.
Exactly. I've gotten into the habit of, whenever a player asks me, can I do this? I'm like, you can certainly try.
Yeah, and I think that's become like the Matt Mercer saying. But I've been saying it since 1984, so he clearly stole that from me.
Stole it. So, speaking of mistakes, then, you must have had a couple in your experience as a player or GM. So, like, what was your biggest mistake, and how did you learn from it at the table?
Wow. My biggest mistake. Gosh, I
don't mean to get too juicy on
No,
you.
yeah, I'm trying to think of the times that I have had when I've had a session and afterwards reflected on it and felt like, they weren't having the amount of fun that I was expecting them to have, and maybe even I didn't have very much fun. It's usually because of a lack of preparation.
Because GMs get to have fun too.
Yeah. And not always because we kill a player, although I do like to play up the evil GM, even though I'm really not that bad. But yeah, the few times that I felt like I had a really, really bad session, I can usually trace it down to I was like, you know what, I'm just going to shoot from the hip tonight. I'm just going to take whatever they give me. We're just going to roll with it, and we're just going to have fun. Discovered that maybe I'm not the shoot from the hip GM. Maybe I am the plan.
Need to have some preparation under your belt.
Yeah. I certainly do better when I have plenty of maps and plenty of minis, and I'm ready for contingencies, and I'm not just trying to make it up as I go along. I have known some people who are natural improvisational geniuses. That's not me.
Sure.
Yeah, but I tell you what, because this is an exclusive that's just for the patrons.
For extra special people out there.
I'll tell you the story of the one time in my entire role-playing career, only one time have I had a player literally go into tears and quit the game and run away.
Oh no.
Yeah. And this is
right.
a super polarizing story.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah.
We're gonna sell you the seat, but you'll only need the edge of this Patreon podcast.
That's right. And we'll find out which are you, because every time I share the story, there's two kinds of people. People who 100% support my decision as a GM in this situation. And the other are people who think I really, really messed up as a GM.
Okay.
And this goes back to when I was 15 years old. So we are going back 31 years ago. So if you are one of the people who think I made a mistake as a GM, just remember I was a kid and I was new, and hey, go easy on me.
Do
not at me over this, because I'm an old curmudgeon and I don't really follow my social media anyway. But we were playing the old Western Games D6 Star Wars, and we were playing a very popular adventure module called Tatooine Manhunt. It was popular because it had Boba Fett on the cover, and then when you bought the adventure and you open it, you realize it wasn't actually Boba Fett. It was another knockoff Boba Fett who was wearing armor like his.
The Mandalorian before there was the Mandalorian.
Yeah, the Mandalorian before there was the Mandalorian. But anyway, they're on Tatooine. At the end of a session, the players were making camp on one side of this giant canyon. Like, maybe this was Baker's Canyon back home that Luke used to fly his fighter through or whatever. They made camp and they went to sleep on one side of the canyon, and the spaceport was on the other side of the canyon. And the next morning, they're going to have to get up and walk around this entire massive canyon to get to the city to get their spaceship.
Right.
And I had two players who were very into the Dragonlance novels. And there was a character in those novels named Tasselhoff Burrfoot, who was a Kinder. And if you're not familiar with Kinders, they were extremely mischievous, and they liked to pickpocket people and steal from them, but in a very innocent fashion. It was, I didn't know that you wanted to keep this, because I would assume that if you did, you would have had it locked up. And because you didn't have it locked up, I just thought it was free for anybody, so I just took it.
Sounds like a couple players.
Yeah, so many a Dragonlance RPG game have been ruined by players playing Kinders. But anyway, my two friends, they wanted to play Kinders in Star Wars, so we made Kindarians. And my rule for them was they couldn't do anything that was going to be really harmful to the game or to the fellow players. We weren't in this to piss off our friends. So it was always like lighthearted, humorous stuff, you're breaking for camp, but you can't find the fork to eat your meal. As one of the damn Kindarians must have gotten into my meal kit and took my fork. Stuff like that. So, I would allow them to, write on a little note what they wanted to do and what the applicable skill rolls were and pass it to me. And then I would make a ruling of what the result was. But it was always had to be something that was not going to ruin the game. Well, another one of the players, a friend of mine named Andy, was a bounty hunter. And he wanted to be Boba Fett. So he had a jetpack and he had heavy blasters and the whole nine. And his MO whenever we got into a fight was I'd put out a map and he would use his jetpack to bounce around the map. So instead of walking from this square to that square, he would fire his jetpack and just fly from this square to that square, and that's how he got around.
Sure.
So my mischievous Kinder players passed me a note when we were breaking for camp to sleep next to the giant canyon. And it said, we want to steal the battery out of Andy's jetpack. And they made the roll for their thievery check and the stealth and all that. And I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, so worst that's going to happen is the first time that Andy gets into the next fight and he tries to fire his jetpack, I'm just going to tell him, sorry, it doesn't ignite. You're just going to have to walk to that square. Little did I know the chaos that was going to happen the next morning when everybody woke up. And Andy announces, oh, I'm just going to use my jetpack to fly across the canyon. And I'll get the spaceship out of the starport there, and then I'll fly it back, and that's going to save everybody the walk. And of course, the two Kinders just look at each other and kind of giggling. And he says, okay, so I get a running start. I jump off the edge of the canyon. I allow myself to free fall. I'm going to enjoy the sensation of free fall until the last possible moment. And then, because I'm a badass bounty hunter, then I trigger my jetpack and I come rocketing back up out of the canyon and fly to the other side. And the two Kinders just start dying laughing. And of course, everybody at in this table know when the Kinders start laughing, something is off. And so I say to Andy, okay, yeah, that's cool, but yeah, you don't need to do the whole dive off and you just activate your jetpack and go. He's like, no. I want to jump off the cliff. I want this. It's going to look so cool and badass. I want to do this. And it got to the point where I had to say to Andy, I said, Andy, I am telling you as your friend and as the GM, that is a phenomenally bad idea. I highly recommend you do not do that. Just turn on your jetpack from the safety of where you're standing right now and try to fly across the canyon. And he said, no, I don't care. I'm jumping off the cliff. I'm going to free fall. And I said, fine, you jump off the cliff, you free fall. When it comes time to turn on the jetpack, it doesn't ignite. You crash down in the bottom of the canyon and you die. And Andy did not take well to player death, and I think he was probably a year or two younger than the rest of us as well. I didn't expect it to go this bad, but he did. We were kids. He started crying and he rushed out of the house, and that was the end of his day. So that's the super polarizing story of when good games go bad that I often share. There's a lot of GMs that say, like, if you're a GM and you tell a player, look,
you gave him a chance. You gave him plenty of opportunities to get out of it. He still wanted to, and you let him.
Yes. I respected his agency as a player, and I allowed him to make the mistake. Now, there is also another faction of players who say, realistically, I think the jetpack would probably have like a flashing red light that says the battery is dead, or there should have been some other signal that would have alerted him that it was not operating. In my wizened old age today, if I had that situation come up at my table today at 46 years old, not 15, I think I probably would have said, you look at your indicator and there's a light blinking and been able to bypass
I mean, in all fairness, should have done a flight check, I think.
Yes.
Double checking all the gears and machines and stuff like that. That's just basics of having machinery that can explode.
And it's the basics of traveling with two Kandarians. And typically, like, the humor of it would be like, in the mornings when people wake up, I would have, like, my smuggler. The first thing you say is, I go and I check, do I still have a power pack for my blaster? Yes, you still have a power pack for your blaster. And they would check all this. But that morning, Andy did not check his jetpack.
Oh, well, you gave him a shot, and I think that's what matters. I had a similar thing where I was running Rise of the Rulelords, and I had people in Thornkeep who, spoilers for anyone who hasn't played this decades-old game, decade, I guess, going in, and there is a hall chock-a-block full of goblins, and the main bad guy is in there with her two lackeys, and, doing the big bad guy speech and stuff. And had double doors to it, and they were like, okay, we want to listen in. Okay, that's fine. So, they successfully rolled the stealth to be able to open it. And then someone was like, I want to bust in there. And I didn't have the pawns up because no one could see inside of it, but goblins everywhere. I was like, okay, you open it up a little bit. Do you still want to do this? Yeah, I still want to do this. You open it up a little bit more. You hear the sounds of goblins inside there. Are you sure you want to keep doing this? Yes. And then it was a massacre after that. Sometimes it's on the player, but you give them a shot. And I like
when
that.
The GM gives you a hint, you take it.
Take it. Because there's sometimes not GMs who would give you that hint. So take it. Maybe so that might not have been like the best gaming moment of your life, but what is the best gaming moment? What was something so cool that happened in one of your games that could have like the Lord of the Rings background music and like, slow motion and all of that stuff? If you could turn this into a movie, what would that moment be?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I wish I was a player more than a GM, because when I think about like the perspective of having those big cinematic moments, I think it's probably going to be something that you did as a player where you felt like, Aragorn and you're heroic or something.
Yeah.
As a GM, and I'm 99% of the time I'm a GM, so it's hard for me to reach back. Yeah, man, I don't know if there's really one thing that really stands out. I can tell you, as a GM, my high points are always like 3 years later when I walk into a room and I can hear two of my players laughing about something that happened, in a game 3 years before. And, oh my gosh, you remember that time that this happened? I was certain we were going to die. And at the last minute, Megan rolled a natural 20. And oh gosh, who saw that coming? And, really, those are my highlights as a GM. Those are my highlights.
Yeah.
Is just hearing the players.
Players having fun,
but also just not being disposable. I think, like last night, I GM'd a second edition game, and one of my players repeated, like we were all laughing because things were just going hilariously sideways. And one of my players commented like 3 times, like, yeah, this is really bad, but this is so fun. And I was like, well, good. Like, that's great. That's all that matters. This is as far removed from what I expected this night to be, because they ended up being charmed by an alien moon mole that they then adopted as a pet.
I love those moments.
And the moon mole has an aura effect that when a creature comes within 30 feet of it, it has to make a will save or it becomes fascinated by the moon mole. So they ended up weaponizing the moon mole and carrying it through the dungeon, holding it in front of them, so that any enemy that they encountered would first be fascinated by the moon mole.
Right.
And it was just like the most bizarre, hilarious sidebar.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have a grand story to share. It's just all those little moments that make GMing fun and memorable.
Exactly. During the times that you have been GMing, you've probably had to have been a player at some point, or maybe watch Let's Plays, or I don't know if you do Critical Role. I will go on the record of saying I have not actually ever watched a full episode of Critical Role. What's something that when you have been playing or being another GM or listening to other people, what's something that you've adopted from someone else's GMing style? It doesn't have to be a famous person. It can just be like someone who is really, really good at what they did. And what did you take away from that and start putting into your own games?
Oh, yeah. The big one that comes to mind is I've got a friend of mine who unfortunately moved to your neck of the woods out on the West Coast, so I don't get to game with him very much anymore. What he does is, as a GM, he has a giant whiteboard behind him. And whenever he introduces a new NPC or a new location, he has a deck of cards. In the deck of cards, each card corresponds to a player. So he shuffles the card, and then he flips over the top card, and that will choose randomly one of the players. And so he'd flip over the card and say, so Pete, what is this NPC's gender? And then you would declare what their gender is, and then would flip over another card and say, okay, Mike, what is their name? and then would just keep flipping over cards and
Oh.
asking questions. And while he's doing this, he's writing on the whiteboard behind him the description of the NPC. So he keeps doing that until he has the character's name, nickname, physical appearance, personality traits. How did they get their nickname? What's a distinguishing feature about them? Who is their best friend? Who is somebody in this city that they hate? And he just keeps asking questions randomly amongst the players until he has completely fleshed out the NPC. Or if it's a location, it's like, it's a gambling hall. Well, what's the name of the hall? Well, how did it get that name? What's unique about it? Who's the proprietor?
Getting buy-in from people.
Yeah, so, and then by the time he's done, all of us as players, not only do we know a lot about these NPCs, they're fully fleshed out and real, and we all have a sense of ownership of these locations and these players, so we're more attached to them emotionally as players as well. So that makes an NPC far, far, far more captivating in a game than just saying, this is Agent Solace, and he is a guy well-dressed wearing shades, and he's menacing.
A person that you have never met or care about.
Yes, and once they're gone, it will be, okay, oh gosh, what was the name of that agent guy we met 4 sessions ago? But then again, like in the last game we played, we created this bodyguard that we named the Brass Dragon. And we will all remember the Brass Dragon because, well, a little bit of us lives in creating the Brass Dragon. So yeah, so that's something that I've taken away from the way that he GMs.
What are some other top tools for GMs that you'd recommend? Either like a physical thing or a soft skill, like a piece of advice that you hope people take to heart?
Yeah, so my biggest advice, I think I've given before, which is find ways to say yes instead of saying no. That's always my biggest advice, along with always set your expectations for the players to head off problems. Physical tools, the best investment you can have monetarily is to get a wet erase mat where you can just draw on and use for really any game. Digitally PF easy tools, I think, is the best thing since sliced bread for Playfinder 2nd edition games.
That is always up in my games. Every single time.
I had a game a couple weeks ago and the server was down and I was panicking. I was like, I don't know I can get through this without having PF Easy tools up. Lately, I started using condition coins, which is something I got through Kickstarter, which are little metal rings that are the size of the base of a standard mini. And like the rings say things like poisoned, confused, blessed, whatever. And so you can always remember which of the targets are under these conditions because you just place this little ring underneath their base. Yeah, have a good initiative tracker. I think the magnetic initiative tracker that Paizo sells is fantastic. I also use Fantasy Grounds on a laptop when I GM for initiative tracking because it also tracks statuses and whatnot. Yeah, I guess those are my go-to tools for all the GMs out there.
Well, our time is coming to a close, but before we go, I have 2 things for you. The second one we'll do after this, but the first, I want to test your knowledge of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And we're going to do that by comparing it to playtests. So we're going to play Playtest Test, where I'm going to read you a rule, and it'll come from either the 2nd Edition core rulebook, the second print, so it'll be correct, or it'll come from the playtest book in its original form, not counting all of the updates that Paizo ran throughout this playtest. I'm going to read the full thing. Stop me whenever you think you know whether it's from the playtest or from Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I'll note that these are things that are in both, so I'm not going to read you something that doesn't exist anymore, like resonance points or something, but we're going to try to figure out how well you know your 2nd Edition. So, you ready, Dave?
I hope so. People are going to find out that, I know the rules when I make a video, and then I forget those rules a day later. So this is going to really help my rep. Thanks a lot, man.
You're welcome. All right, so the first one of these rules is Burn It, which is a feat for goblins, ancestral feat for goblins. It says, fire fascinates you. Your spells and alchemical items that deal fire damage gain a conditional bonus to damage equal to half the spell's level or the item's level with a minimum of 1. You also gain a +1 conditional bonus to any persistent fire damage you deal, whether it's from a spell or not.
Yeah, I want to say that is playtest because conditional bonus is not a bonus type in 2nd edition.
Exactly! In 2e, it says you get a +1 status bonus to any persistent fire damage you deal. Well done!
Woohoo.
That is 1 hero point for you.
Awesome.
The next one is the Cover Tracks skill feat. You cover your tracks, moving up to half your travel speed. You don't need to attempt a survival check to cover your tracks, but anyone tracking you must succeed at a survival check against your survival DC if it is higher than the normal DC to track. In some cases, you might cover tracks in an encounter. In this case, covered tracks is a single action and doesn't have the exploration trait.
Okay, so I myself have not had cause to use tracking in my games, but I didn't hear anything that made me just obviously say that that's not compatible with the 2nd edition, so I'm going to say that that's an official rule.
That is! The playtest had a 1 action symbol to it and was a lot shorter. Basically just saying you can move half your speed, you don't need a survival check, but anyone tracking you must succeed at your survival DC if it's higher than the normal DC to track.
All right.
Next is Die Hard, a general feat. Feat 1. With the general and skill trait. It takes more to kill you than most. You die from the dying condition at dying 5 rather than dying 4.
I know that feat exists in 2nd edition. I know several of my players have taken it because of TPKs that have happened. I'm trying to recall if the wording is that it increases the point where you die, or if it just says it becomes 5. I'm gonna say that's an official rule.
The one that I'm reading from specifically is from the playtest.
Okay.
It is word for word exactly the same from the playtest to the 2e rules, except that 2e dropped the skill trait from it.
Okay. Yeah, that did sound a little fishy when he said about it. I didn't latch onto it. All right. Well, I'm still ahead 2-1.
You
right?
are still ahead, so you're well on your way. The next one is the No Direction Cantrip 1, which has detection and divination traits, and its traditions are divine, occult, and primal. You cast it with somatic and verbal. In your mind's eye, you see a path northward. You immediately know which direction is north if it exists at your current location. Heightened 7, you can instead know the direction to a familiar location, such as a previous home or a favorite tavern.
Yeah, speaking of another ability that I've never had it used in a game.
And a very cool podcast for you.
Yeah, obviously, the only No Direction I know is the podcast. I'm going to say that's an official one.
That is. The playtest provided a little bit more detail at level 7 and didn't list traditions, but is otherwise very much the same. Doing well, so 3-1 at this point.
Hey, in 3 out of 5, so worst case scenario, I've got the majority.
The next one is doubling and halving damage. That L always gets me. Sometimes you'll have to have or double an amount of damage. When you have damage, you roll the normal damage specified and have the resulting number rounding down. You do this whether the damage is delivered by an effect with an attack roll or one that required a creature to attempt to save. How you double damage depends on the effect's delivery. If the damage comes from an effect with an attack roll, you double the normal number of dice and apply all damage modifiers, bonuses, and penalties twice. If the damage comes from an effect allowing a creature to attempt a saving throw, you double the damage total instead, rather than rolling more dice.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that's the playtest because I don't think that they have separated the rules for the doubling in 2nd edition, and I also am not sure that they specify that you round down when you have, because you are instructed to by default round down, and they will only specify otherwise when you round up.
Exactly. So 2e allows you to do either of the things that they mentioned in the playtest. So you can roll normal damage plus modifiers and doubling that total, but it also provided information about damage you specifically get from a crit and how that isn't doubled.
All
So
right.
well done. So I have one more bonus question. One to help you get to that 5 total. A little
Out of
bit of
6.
extra credit. Yeah.
All right.
Out of 6, but we'll do 5 as 100%. It's extra credit.
I'll take it.
This comes from the Game Mastery part. It's table 10-8, XP Awards. The accomplishment and XP. For a minor accomplishment, you get 10 XP. For a moderate, you get 30 XP. For a major accomplishment, you get 80 XP. A moderate and major typically earn a hero point as well.
I want to say playtest.
Oh, I am sorry. That is actually 2E. They are very much exactly the same, but 2E added the little stipulation about certain areas giving you a hero point.
Then I would like to take this moment to apologize to all my players because I think I owe you hero points.
That's okay. I am terrible at that as well. Well, 4 out of 5 is not bad. And so I give you the completely meaningless, it comes with no vassals, no land title of Rulelord. Congratulations!
Well, I am honored. I will cherish this day for years to come.
So, as a Rulelord, you get to do a Rulelord ruling, which is a question that was submitted by one of our listeners about a question that they had and weren't able to resolve at their table. This one actually comes from another Pathfinder creator, Mike of Galarian In Depth, who asks, what happens when you sustain clinging ice? Do they take damage every round? Do they need to make a new save every round? Is only the effect for movement sustained? I'm pretty sure it's only the effect to movement that is sustained, but our group had a debate about this.
So the good news here is you are absolutely correct. When you sustain clinging ice, the only thing that's really going to be affected by that is the speed reduction of anybody that failed or critically failed the initial save against that spell. Because when you sustain something, by default, all sustaining does is just increases the duration of that effect by 1 round, up until the limits of the duration. Clinging ice has a duration of sustain up to 1 minute. So when you sustain that, all you're doing is just keeping that victim of it suffering either a -5 or -10 foot circumstance penalty to their speed. So if the victim or target of that initial spell had succeeded or critically succeeded on that spell, then I don't think there's really any point to sustaining it. You'd only be doing it if they had failed and are therefore suffering the speed penalty. And this is going to be different than other spells, like, for example, Flaming Sphere, that specifically state other things that happen when you sustain. With Flaming Sphere, it says the first time that you sustain it each round, then you basically can attack with the sphere again, causing that target to have to make a basic reflex save or suffer 3d6 fire damage. So that's an example that specifically calls out that you need to make a save and that there is additional effects. Otherwise, in absence of something like that, then sustain is just extending the duration, and that's all it is. It doesn't mean you attack again. It doesn't mean there's another save, not by default. And I am going to just, be selfish and plug one of my videos. If you want more information, check out Rule Reminder number 16 by How It's Played, or from How It's Played, that goes into another witch cantrip called Personal Blizzard, where I dive into what the effects of sustaining that spell are, and they're very similar to
Excellent.
That's my ruling as an official Rulelord. I have made my my ruling.
What is your sentence, Rulelord?
To the people at the table who got that wrong, it sounds like the GM I am in agreement with. All their players, and I hope there are dozens of players, must all now subscribe to the How It's Played YouTube channel and watch Rule Reminder 16, all about the Personal Blizzard spell.
A fair ruling, my lord. Thank you. I think that answer more than makes up for the point in the playtest test. We're going to head off, but before we do, tell us, where can we get more information about your projects? Is it just the YouTube channel, or is there something more?
Yeah, I mean, you can check out YouTube. My channel is How It's Played. On Twitter, I am how_it's_played_. Yes, there are 3 words and 3 underscores. There is an underscore at the end because it's Twitter. You can always find me there. There is a How It's Played Facebook group as well. And on Reddit, I'm user How It's Played, all one word. If you want to find me, you can find me.
So it sounds like pretty much how it's played everywhere. Well, awesome. Dave, it has been an amazing honor for you to be on the podcast. I hope that you had fun, and listener, I hope you enjoyed listening.
Yeah, it was a real good time. Thanks for having me, and I'll look forward to coming back sometime in the future. And thanks for listening, all you awesome exclusive patrons out there.
And until next session,
don't let the rules rule you.